Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. About a month ago, must have been late August, 4XOverland, Andrew St Pierre White, put out a video after he'd finished taking his Range Rover Classic, I think it was a 47-year-old Range Rover Classic 2-door, across the Canning stock. Now during that trip, his Toyota Troopy ended up with a stick removing the ABS sensor. So we got a warning, took it off, the vehicle carried on going. At the end of that trip, he made some comment about the fact that the Range Rover Classic had made it without real fault. But modern day Land Rovers, if the ABS sensor had gone, would basically make the vehicle inoperable, it would stop it dead. Now in this community, the overlanding community, that sort of went viral for a couple of weeks. The challenge was put out, and Simon at Powerful UK put a video out basically saying, "I'm sorry mate, you're wrong," and proved it. So Andrew St Pierre White got back on his video platform, admitted he was wrong and that it was proved right by Simon, but then continued to talk about electronic air suspension, all of the faults. He then started down that the vehicle automatically lowers itself at 50 miles an hour, which would make it useless in corrugations, and started another one of his hair going everywhere, his arms flapping around, rants. And that's what it was another rant. Now I've had a number of these vehicles that have had electronic air suspension. I'm pretty familiar with my L322, and I know it very intimately by now, and I know all the niggles on it, all the issues, all the things to be aware of. So Mr. ASPW, whether you watch this or not, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong again. So let's address this 50 mile an hour issue. You are correct. In factory mode, the vehicle, all of them, will lower themselves down at 50 mile an hour from whatever setting it is, and that's to improve aerodynamics and get the vehicle to sit lower towards the ground. Now those of us that have these vehicles have a number of things at our disposal where we can actually override that. The first thing is you can buy these things called lift kits or Johnson rods, which basically will lift the entire vehicle up 2 inches, 2.5 inches. I believe there's even a 3-inch lift kit now. And what that does, it tricks the system into thinking that it's running 2 inches higher than it actually is. So if it tried to lower itself at 50 mile an hour down, it simply won't do it. It thinks it's doing it, but because the lift rods are in place, it won't lower itself down to the forward lowered mode, which means if you had a lift kit, putting in the new rods that replace the actuating arms with longer ones, that's one way of overriding it. Number two, pretty much all of us that have these vehicles have a gap tool. So we can plug our gap tool in, and with the wonders of that technology, through our phones, we can configure those settings the same as you can with a Johnson rod kit to move each of the settings up by 1 inch, 2 inch, or even 3 inches. We can do that, which turns the EAS system and lifts it in all 3 settings. So the way that it works is if I want all settings up 1 inch, everything goes up. Access height, normal height, and off-road mode. I could go up 2 inches and pushes everything up 2 inches. So that's another way of doing it. There's a third way you can do it as well. And there are a number of these kits on the market. I have something called an Easy Lift kit from Land Rover Passion. And it does exactly the same thing, but it's a bolt-on ECU to the EAS ECU in the back of my vehicle. Now what that allows me to do is independently move up 3 settings. So plus 25, plus 55. I can even go to plus 75 if I want to as well. I can also stay neutral, and I can go lower than that as well. 3 test settings that will push me right the way down on the bump stops. Now, I don't particularly want to go lower. I definitely want to go higher. So the trip that I've just done, pretty much all the way through Spain, 500 miles off-road, I have been sitting at plus 55 on-road, off-road the entire trip. No issues. So there are 3 ways you can override that. And I actually would argue that airbag suspension will be far, far more comfortable on corrugations than running around on springs. It just will be. I can tell you that for a fact. Off-road, it is far more comfortable riding around on airbags than it is riding around on coil springs or leaf springs. You get less jarring, you don't feel the road as much. It would be far more comfortable because the bags and the air will be softening the ride. Prove me wrong, but I'm pretty sure, based on my experience, it'll be far more comfortable. Now, I'm not going to get into coil springs, articulation, electronic air suspension. There's no point. Everybody's got their own thoughts on it. Everyone's got their own camps. There's no point in getting to that. Toyota, Jeeps, everybody else running around on coil springs will always defend the fact that they can get better articulation. Well, whoopee shit. If you're going to do Moab, go do Moab in those vehicles and raise them up 5 inches and put these massive coil springs on. Go for it if that's the type of off-roading you want to do. They're definitely better for that than what we drive. Now, let's look at the complexity of this EAS system. He also made some assertions that if you lost a monitor, which is the suspension actuating arm, in with the 4 corners, it would dump itself into low ride mode and you couldn't get yourself home. Well, that's not true either. What happens is each of the 4 corners have these actuating arms. So by putting the lift rods in, you basically take out the factory ones, push them up. But in each corner there's an actuator that works out the movements multiple times a second. I'm not sure what that number is, but there's a lot of times that it moves. So every time it moves in those corners, it's sending pulses electronics back to the ECU to tell it what it needs to do with putting air into the bags. That's how it works. You can lose one of those on each one of the 4 corners and it will keep on going. So if you lost the driver's side front, that actuator broke, failed, whatever, the vehicle would still have enough information to be able to run that suspension system. It would not dump it into low ride mode. Now, if you lost 2, or both the front axle or both the rear axle or corner to corner, it probably would sink itself. But you would have to have some serious bad luck to lose 2. So it will not put itself down into low ride mode if you lose one of those actuators that monitors the suspension. Now let's look at the other components that make them up. The next thing is the compressor. Now people have said, yeah, well, you need a compressor. It's an electric motor. Okay, it is. My compressor was on my L322 for 11.5 years. And it started making noises where you knew that it was beginning to think, hang on a minute, it's on its way out. And I was also getting messages saying, raising vehicles slowly, which is another indication that it was beginning to struggle. That one came out. That was the original factory compressor in the boot. Now that's been replaced. Now the chances of you losing a compressor on a trip, if it's not original factory one, has been replaced, minute, but you would also be able to figure out ways around it. You could buy kits that put Schrader valves onto the bags that you can manually pump them up. And let's face it, most of us that go off-road have got a compressor anyway. So we could go around and pump up the bags. Now you won't be able to articulate it, you won't be able to set it up and down, that would all go, but you could still get yourself home. So I don't think that that is an issue either. The third component are the airbags. And people say they leak and all those sorts of things. Yes, they do. They leak if you do not inspect them. They leak if you do not maintain them properly. And they're going to wear out. It's just the same as coil springs. Over a period of time, coil springs will sag. Leaf springs will sag. 5 years on an airbag is pretty good going, especially if you're taking it off-road. So let's look at the reality of that. If you pop a bag, can you fix it? Yeah, you can fix it. Because there's ways you can move some of the valves out of the way. You can block it, you can put a Schrader valve in it. There's a number of things that you can do to keep yourself moving. But I'm sorry, but the air suspension is not one of these things that you need to worry about. Now, do we take spares? Yes. I've got a spare actuating arm. I've got some Schrader valves if I need to go do it. And like I said, I've replaced my compressor at the start of the year and it's been fine. So I really don't need to worry about it. I'm confident that my car will go from point A to point B and do it comfortably and do it reliably. So that's my take on it. I'm sorry, Mr. ASPW, but you've been wrong. You've been proven wrong. And I'm really disappointed the fact that you keep on doubling down on this. So, Mr. ASPW, my challenge to you would be, go find somebody in Oz that has a Discovery 3 or 4, or an L322, or a Land Rover vehicle, even a new Defender, that has air suspension. Invite them down the canning stock with you and your mates in your Toyotas, and let's see how it does. Lots of people have been replying to you. Lots of people have been telling you you are wrong. So now's the time for you to put up or shut up. Go on. You love making content. I think you're one of the best content makers of this type of travel, probably on the internet. But now's the time for you to go get one of these vehicles and show us how bad it really is. And once and for all, we can lay these myths to bed. And with that, over to you, Mr. ASPW. Cheers.